In part 2 of this evidence statement section, we are going to look at how to apply these evidence statements to an actual item, why the evidence statements are valuable to our POW Science work, and where to find them on the NGSS website. For illustrative purposes, let's try to look at Grade 3 LS3-2 to see how it may fit using the evidence statements and to help guide us in our work. One thing to note based on the clarification statement, we know this item example is appropriate. So does this item call on constructing explanations? And what about cause and effect? If you answered yes, what observable features of student performance would help us to know if this item appropriately fits or is well aligned to the standard? In the question, describe an experiment that will provide evidence for which farmer is right. You can use seeds from both tall and short plants. Does the first question, describe the steps you will follow, get at the explanation practice? Is there any statement that relates to inherited traits being influenced by their environment and having the students describe their steps? There could be, but it provides us with an example of having a well-designed rubric for constructed response items. At this time, we may not be able to answer this question with a simple yes or no. Until we have more information about how this item is scored and what student response evidence is required, we really can't answer yes or no. The second aspect of this evidence statement is evidence. Does the question, describe how you will collect your data, does it get at any of these evidence options, such as environmental factors that vary for organisms of the same type, for instance, amount of food, amount of water, amount of exercise an animal gets, or chemicals in the water that may influence organisms' traits? Again, it could, but we don't have enough rubric information to know if this level of knowledge and evidence production is required from the student. Lastly, does the question, how will you conclude if the tallness is inherited or caused by getting more water? Does this question get at the reasoning, where connect the evidence and support an explanation about environmental influences on inherited traits in organism? To answer this one, the answer is probably yes. This stepwise example of using the evidence statements illustrates the three-dimensional nature of the standards, the need for additional details for student performance in any assessment items, and how we can use a backwards design process, that is, an already aligned item first, and then apply these evidence statements later. For our POW Science purposes, we want to use the language of the evidence statements to potentially draw on in our future development of formative, interim, and summative tests. By doing this alignment in our first form of the POW formative science work, we are attaching explicit language about observable features of student performance by the end of the grade, so this will be a very helpful exercise for us to write any claim or assessment targets for any test type that can be used with these example items. As mentioned in the last slide, our impetus is to potentially use these exemplars in our blueprint stages for formative, interim, and possibly even summative tests to help us identify what details are necessary for test and item development. As you may recall from the reference documents video in our first module of the course, evidence statements get at the evidence-centered design principles for test development. Central to this idea, items must collect evidence through response that directly supports a claim. Our claims are the performance expectations, but to write explicit guidance for test development, item writers will need guidance on whether item examples have the level of details or evidence to support the claim. Thus, the evidence statements may help us with this, and asking for the language features or vocabulary in the first form will also provide us with the necessary language and concepts required for this content. So what methods will we use to elicit such evidence? By using item exemplars from our formative development work, we have example item types and formats to show how evidence will be elicited from students to support these claims. As I am sure you can tell, the evidence statements may prove to be an invaluable resource for not only our POW Science formative assessment development, but also for helping us tease out expectations for future test and item development based on these identified exemplars. Since we will be using these resources extensively, let's walk through where to find these on the NGSS website. So hopefully the website looks familiar to you. First, we're going to look at what is beneath each one of these tabs. So first, get to know the standards. Here you can see many layers to the website that might be helpful in learning more about how these standards came to be. Also, under Find Tools and Resources, there are specific resources for teachers, and as you can see, you can locate the evidence statements under this tab. Another helpful feature of the website is to use the Search by Standards tab. Here you can look up by DCI, by topic, and also look at those appendices that we have been referencing throughout these videos. So let's start by going to the Find Tools and Resources and looking at the evidence statements in this view. So here we could look up that example we just discussed by clicking on Grade 3, and then we also know that it was in Life Sciences, and hit Submit. In here we can see the 3 LS3-2. And here we would see the evidence statements. Another example, and this one might be easier for you based on the already given alignments, is to go to the Search the Standards. In the Search the Standards, what you want to do, if we're using that example again, is simply click on where it is appropriate, so Grade 3, and we know what content it was in, so we have the component DCI, and we know that that is LS, 3A, and B, and hit Submit. Now we can see the two examples that we discussed for Grade 3. Let's look at the Grade 3 LS3-1 just as an example. So now we have the performance expectation. As we discussed, we have the foundation boxes, and we have the connections to math and ELA for the Common Core state standards. Now if we wanted to get to the evidence statement from this example, we would simply navigate over here to the right-hand side. So here we can see the evidence statements for the 3-LS3-1. All users should spend time understanding the framework for K-12 science education and the NGSS prior to using the evidence statements. For assessment, the evidence statements can be used to inform the development of summative assessments, but context would have to be added to the statements to align with the specific examples or prompts used in assessment. For instruction, the evidence statements can be used in support of instructional design, but it is crucial to recognize that there are numerous pathways educators may use across the course of lessons and units to allow students to ultimately be prepared for success on the performance expectations. Although evidence statements are listed individually for each performance expectation, this does not indicate that they should be measured individually, or that performance expectations should be taught or assessed individually. Classroom instruction should be focused on helping students build towards several performance expectations at one time, because many concepts and practices are interrelated. The evidence statements cannot do the following. They cannot provide or prescribe the context through which the performance expectations may be taught or assessed, be the rubrics on which levels of students' success would be measured, identify the sequence of instruction or assessment, put limits on student learning or student coursework, replace lesson plans or assessment items, serve as complete scoring rubrics. Remember, evidence statements are not to be used as curriculum or limit or dictate instruction. Now we encourage you to explore the NGSS website more thoroughly. You may stumble upon some resources like the classroom sample task that might be very helpful and illustrative for our POW Science work. You might also uncover things to share with the group that we may have not touched on in these modules. For instance, you may want to download the mobile NGSS app for quick access to the standards, or you may want to peruse the Equip rubric for some guidance on aligning your curriculum and instructional materials. Or you may want to explore some example storylines to tie student interests and natural questions into your scope and sequence. Lastly, we'll end this section with the idea that all of our POW Science work will be meaningful and valuable to fellow Montana science educators, as we are going through a very proven and thoughtful process to consider all of these resources. With this process in mind, all examples will be considered, and there is no wrong way to do our formative activity and resource development work. Consider us as the pioneers and paving the way for other states to follow.